There are a couple folks here who might have had questions while we've got a couple minutes to burn. I'm happy to answer those from the last session if you weren't there. Sir?
When you talked about the sonar charts, the ones with that detail, does every boat that transmits AIS data or ZAP data, or is it special boats that are...
No, great question. Well, we talked about automated crowdsourced data, and many of you, if you've got Garmin products, you can turn on what's called Garmin calls sonar charts. Raymarine products, it's called the Lighthouse Enhanced, and on Navionics, it's sonar chart. It is, instead of just plotted charted depths, what happens is, and it's not every vessel, it's not like Google Maps, everybody that's driving down the highway is constantly transmitting how fast they're going, and that's how Google Maps turns yellow or red or Waze or whatever. You have to basically sign up to be a contributor, and you have to have a current enough system. Your fathometer has to be their brand, and your quality of GPS has to be good enough. However, as we talked in the earlier session, what they don't do is they don't come and inspect your boat to see if you've applied the correct offset to your fathometer to account for how deep below the waterline it is mounted in the hull. And so they kind of...
Your sense that those charts are pretty accurate?
They are. I mean, I'd say, as we talked in the last session, the waters that we steam on here, with exception of the center of the main channel of Chesapeake Bay, we're steaming on 1930 to 1939 soundings. And so even with a minor error, and I think the fusion center at Garmin, and Garmin bought Navionics, so the Garmin and Navionics are one. The fusion center that their data is running is certainly averaging inputs over time from hundreds of boats that are contributing that data. And so if there's an anomaly, or if consistently most people show 12 feet over a certain spot and somebody shows 10, I bet they're ignoring that. So I'd say, but the key is it's more reliable than 1939 data, but needs to be used with caution. All right, they're giving me the thumbs up that the internet is back on, and we're connected again. My name is Tate Westbrook, and for those of you who are not in the first session, which was Nav 101, and I expected all of you to study over lunch. That's why this is Nav 301. So we had a few little quick sessions, and I'm sorry for those who were in the earlier session. I went long. Ashley was, trying to wave me down. I was going way over time, so I'll do my best to, let me keep my timer on right here. I am a retired Navy captain, but before that, I I grew up in Tennessee, so certainly not a saltwater boater originally, sailing on inland lakes, small powerboats, whatever. That led me to a Navy ROTC career, and I retired 3 years ago as a retired Commodore captain after a 28-year career. And so I have steamed around the world. I was the captain of a destroyer. I was Commodore of all of our ships in Europe and Africa, and probably have over 100,000 sea miles under my keel, and have visited, almost 100 countries and countless different port visits. So I've seen a lot, and I love conveying this in a way that hopefully makes sense to the recreational boater. My wife and I have owned lots of powerboats and sailboats, but as we'll talk about a number of very technical topics potentially today, I have a degree in rhetoric and an MBA. So you do not have to be an engineer or a scientist to be a good navigator or to work on your boat or whatever. I prove every day I know enough to break my boat, but I fix most of it. So today I want to help you expand your cruising grounds with kind of the next level of navigation. This morning, for those of us who joined us in Navigation 101, welcome back. And so again, I hoped you were studying over lunch. We had a number of questions here, and I just choked down a sandwich real fast, so we're good. So, and again, I want to reiterate that despite my Navy biography, I am still learning too. I learn something new every day. I frequently study the study guides. When I was in the Navy, we were required, when I was on sea duty, assigned to various ships, we would get tested on the collision regulations, the navigation rules of the road, at least once a month. And so I expect everybody, we talked about this in depth, or not in depth, we went over the real rules of the road, kidding, have to know. But really, I expect everybody. This is not a commercial document. Everybody's expected to know and comply. If your vessel's 40 feet or greater, you have to have a copy on board. It has to be the latest copy. And there are lots of internet-based versions that help explain it a little better than this scholastic reading thing, but it's still pretty easy to read. So I encourage you, if you're not super familiar with it and really haven't taken the time to read the rules of the road, it isn't as boring and as tedious as it might sound, but we were tested, at least once a month, and if you didn't get better than a 90, then you were pulled off the watch bill. So we always studied, and I still look it up and need a refresher. So the key is, I'm still learning, so it's okay. That's why we're all here. I started this morning's lesson with this, and I'm repeating it again for anybody who wasn't in this morning. Crew resource management, bridge resource management, or it started in the aviation world, cockpit resource management, is the fundamentals of this apply every time you're underway on your boat with more than one person. And it's all about management, leadership, communications, and decision making. For any of you who are in either the medical, transportation, firefighting, other high-risk industries, you probably have some equivalent that you train to. And in the Navy, we train to it calling bridge resource management. But even though we're not operating commercial vessels, it still applies. And so the leadership piece, if you and your frequent cruising partner sometimes trade roles, you're going to plan the next voyage and you're going to run the boat, you've got to be crystal clear on that. If you do swap back and forth in most relationships, sometimes one person is kind of the primary navigator and the other is crew. If you do switch, then make that clear. It's like, okay, today I'm the captain. And then cross-training to me is the key, because if you read the description of many sad and tragic mishaps, whether it's here on the Chesapeake or anywhere else in the country, frequently a contributing factor that added either time, confusion, other damage or danger to the person or the vessel or both is because whoever that person is who's the primary watchstander is the one who's incapacitated or falls overboard or gets injured or has the heart attack or whatever. And that crew member who wasn't fully cross-trained is the one who's put at greater risk because of that. So please cross-train and rehearse. Right at the bottom, rehearse your casualties and practice what, so in the time of stress. Pre-briefs for sure. My wife and I, we do a little pre-brief because almost every time we've got a different group of people, at least one person's new. Doesn't know their way around the boat, so we do the basics of here's where the fire extinguishers are, and here's the procedures that we're going to do for man overboard, and here's where I want you, but also here's how you operate the head, please, and how not to do it, that sort of thing. 2 hands on the ladder, only face forward, all that kind of thing. Don't hint and hope is in bold here, because that's powerful lessons learned again from real world mishaps in aviation and in medicine, in the operating room, et cetera. So instead of like one famous aviation incident with 2 planes colliding on the ground together, the first officer said to the captain, he's like, "Yeah, I've never seen the runway here in Denver this dark before." That's hint and hope. What the first officer should have said was, "You're on the taxiway, this is not the runway, stop the engines now." And instead he went too far down and collided with a parked aircraft. Similarly, if it's you and your spouse or partner and one is checking the chart more closely or has noticed a buoy because you've been talking to a friend or whatever, and it's like, yeah, I think you're a little too close to that marker there. Instead, it's like, you are too close, come left now, is the difference between avoiding a collision or some major issue. I'm a believer in checklists. Your procedures are what you've got to use on board, but you've got to codify those and kind of come up with your own plan and practice it. And then I'm also a big fan of repeat backs, and this is something that truly takes practice, because it sounds kind of awkward unless you're from the military or the medical world or firefighting or a few others, where it's in the Navy, it's the command, send over all lines, leave all lines on the dock, or take in all lines if you're going somewhere and you're taking your lines with you, and somebody on the other end of a little phone is saying, take in all lines aye, and then you get all lines in, all lines on board forward, all lines on board aft, all lines clear. We don't do the interim steps on our boat, and usually it's me leaving the slip, and Ashley is kind of running the deck crew and specifying who it is. It's like Ashley's gonna run the lines, I'll be inside at the helm. Ashley always reports to me, sorry, this is Ashley, my wife, I didn't introduce you earlier. Ashley always reports to me, all lines clear. And so I can see it mostly visually, but what if she running her line crew was back there and they had one coiled up, or it was off the dock, but it had just fallen in the water? We've got experience when we had a sailboat in Maine, that happened, the line was on board, but then it fell in, wrapped around the prop, and we're getting blown downwind into $1 million Hinkley's in our little dinky sailboat. That was a bad day. But had we had a little bit more clarity and a little more practice doing that, okay, all lines clear, in that case it was all lines clear and stowed would have been the key, we would have avoided that. Yeah, discuss your plan. The captain has 51% of the vote, but everybody, when I was commanding officer of a ship, it was written into my, like page 1 of the CO standing orders to empower my crew. I wrote a paragraph that said, no matter what your rating, which is your job specialty in the Navy, your time on board, et cetera, sometimes you and you alone may be the only person who sees, hears, or smells something that just doesn't seem right. Speak up, because you may be the only one who saw it. And so the same is true, and I think encouraging your crew and encouraging in that little brief that, hey, if you see something weird, even if this is your first time on our boat, let me know. I'll make the decision if it's weird or not, but not telling me is bad. And then, yes, practice all the casualties. I've emphasized firefighting here because that picture is from a Boat US Foundation like test training thing that they did. And they got like 15 or 20 boaters from a marina like ours and lit a combined Class Alpha and Bravo fire, so some paper wood and some petroleum products, and then handed each of these experienced boaters, boat owners, a standard 20B2 fire extinguisher, and it's like 66% of them didn't fight the fire properly, to the extremes of some didn't know that a fire bottle has a pin you have to pull before the handle will squeeze, or that you have to squeeze the handle to fire the firefighting agent, and you have to shoot it at the bottom of the flame to fully cover it, that sort of thing. If you haven't used a fire extinguisher in a long time, take advantage of the recent change in the Coast Guard rules that several of your firefighting bottles are now expired. They're now limited to 10 years of the date stamped on them, the small ones. And if you've got one that's about to die or has died, light a little fire or just practice it, in the backyard. All right, so today we're going to get into radar. We didn't do this in the one-on-one lesson, and this was one of the feedbacks from last year's lesson on voyage planning. Was we talked about radar some, but we didn't get into it. So the radar on your vessel is probably mounted some way like mine. This is a picture of our boat, and the radar, you can see just not the white dome on top. That's a track phone antenna that we've never activated. It's right below the dome is the radar, just above the bimini top, and it's 17 feet above the water. Now, I'm not expecting anyone to do public math here. I cannot do the square root of 17, but the formula is at the upper left. The distance that a radar can see in miles is 1.22 times the square root of the height in feet. Now, I can't do 17 in my head, and I didn't even plot it out. I can do the square root of 16, that's 4. So 4 times 1.22 is 4.88. I'll round up to make it easy. My radar can see to the surface of the water. The farthest my radar can see is 5 miles. Now, if beyond, as the diagram shows, beyond the radar horizon, there's another vessel that's of similar height and has a reflective section of its vessel, like a sailboat mast or like my mast on top or my dome, and it's also 16 or 17 feet above the water, then you add those two together. And so at best case, my radar, 17 feet off the water, can detect a blip on my screen, another vessel of my size and construction. Fiberglass is really bad at reflecting radar. So most of the radar return is coming off my aluminum mast, and I've also added 2 radar reflectors to enhance my blip. But the best case it's going to get, solely based on the curvature of the Earth, is twice my height of eye or height of radar gives me 5 miles to the skin of the horizon. Another vessel of similar height can be detected at about the same. So your, out of the box, your radar is labeled it. I've got a 36-mile radar. No, you don't. You've got, effectively, depending on how high you get it. Now, if you've got a commercial ship and your radar is 180 feet off the water, you might actually get a 36-mile achieved radar. But when you see on your box, it's a 24 or a 36-mile open array or whatever, Garmin, Raymarine, there's no need to have it on the 24-mile scale because you physically cannot achieve that. So something to remember. The same thing also applies to human height of eye, and that's the second little curve there, visible. That ratio is slightly less. It's 1.15, so it's basically 1. So when I'm there on the upper bridge wing, I'm at like 14 or 15 feet off the water, so I can probably see to the horizon. The line of the water is about 4 miles away. If I'm down at the main helm, I'm 6 feet tall, and I'm probably standing on a cabin sole that's 3 feet above the water line. So I'm at 9 feet. Again, I can do public square root of 9 is 3. So 3 times 1.15, I can see about 3.5 miles to the horizon. And that's it. I can see beyond it only if the vessel sticks up. Yes, ma'am.
Is the same calculation valid for the VHF radio range?
Absolutely, yes. So my antenna, my radio antenna is taller. Now, the good thing is radio frequency energy does tend to curve a little better, and in warmer water, we have what's called the evaporative surface duct. We'll get way in the weeds here, where there's a section of the water. If it's really warm, it's 20 or 30 feet tall. If it's cool, this time of year, probably none, where the radar energy and radio energy will actually bounce between the surface of the water and the top of that evaporative surface duct, significantly extending your range. VHF radio does tend to curve a little better, so from your height of antenna, you can probably see maybe, mine's taller, and like if you've got a sailboat mast, it's way up there, you're probably seeing 7 or 8, 9 miles to the horizon, and then another boat of a similar size, double that, because they're over the horizon, but their antenna's still way up. So you can probably talk 15 to 20 miles reasonably, recreational vessel to recreational vessel. Commercial ships even farther because their antenna's taller, and it makes up for yours being low because theirs is kind of looking down on yours.
Well, how about storms?
Certainly, yes. This is the physical limitation of radio frequency propagation on a clear day. As soon as you put weather or dust storms or sandstorms coming off Africa, significantly changes the performance of radar and communications and all that sort of stuff. So absolutely, this is the theoretical. But the reason I've got this slide here is that basically this is as good as it can get. Therefore, there's no need to have your range scale on the display cranked way out to 15 or 18 miles, because other than giant ships and big structures on land, your radar literally cannot see it. So no need to try and do that. But the question about radio propagation is also true. That's why channel 13, which is the one we're required to use when we're making passing arrangements with other vessels, et cetera, it's limited by law to 1 watt. And so power projection, it fades, even though your antenna might be able to see farther. A 1 watt signal usually only goes about 5 miles. All your other channels are 25 watts, and they can boom to like 50 miles. So when you want to call the bridge tender, call them on 13, because they will not answer you on 16. All right, so if you've got automatic functions on your radar. Now, we have a 2005 boat that had a electronics upgrade at some point in its life before we bought it in 2018. So our Raymarine E120 is probably 2009 or 2010. Since discontinued, I can't get parts for it, so soon at some point I'll have to upgrade. This is a much newer Raymarine, and these 4 settings on the newest radars all have an automatic function. Mine at 2009, It's automatic, but I can play with them. So gain is, the adjustment of power and directivity of the beam. Now, we won't get into the geekery of that level, but basically think of it, it's how well your radar is transmitting, like shouting. Like you adjust the gain, it's the same as kind of focusing the sound so that you're delivering it better. Now, if you crank up the gain too much, and if you override the automatic functions, then you see what's happening on the right. If your gain is too low, then you won't detect tiny targets. If you've got an automatic gain function, leave it alone. Same with if you've got an automatic sea clutter function and an automatic rain clutter function, leave them alone. They're pretty good at assessing clutter. You want a little bit of fuzz around the inside ring because that's the initial parts of the radar bouncing either off pieces of your boat's superstructure or the water near you. If you dial gain down so much so that there's absolutely no fuzz right next to your own boat, then you have so suppressed it like you see on the far left side. And then finally, interference rejection, I actually leave them off. And in most cases, I sometimes override it. If it's a really calm day, I crank my STC or sea clutter down to 0. And I crank if it's not raining or there's no fog, I crank my rain clutter or fast time constant down to 0 because they're filters. And so you are clipping the edge of the leading edge of the wave for sea clutter, you're clipping the edge of the far part of the wave, and you're basically shortening the wavelength, which is your effective power out. It could be the difference between detecting a tiny vessel, et cetera. But if you're not comfortable playing with that and you've got automatic gain, automatic sea clutter, automatic rain clutter, and automatic interference rejection, they're gonna work fine on their own, especially if you've got newer Doppler radars. I'll wipe a tear from my eye. Would love to have that technology because it's really good at tracking moving targets, self-adjusting, lots of smart stuff inside that helps it for you. Yes, sir, question?
Dumb question.
No such thing.
Can you see crab pots?
On a really calm day, a really good radar, like some of these newer digital radars can. Mine does not, but even the tiniest buoys, little like the no wake zone buoys or whatever, and they're plastic tubes that have maybe one metal pole, not a good radar return at all, and on the proper, and also a lot of them have, I didn't have a slide on this, but you've got coastal, harbor, and offshore setting on many radars. That's just giving you're telling all of these automatic controls where you are in cruising. And so if you're in harbor mode, it actually will dial down the gain just a little bit so that you don't get huge fuzzy returns bouncing off nearby docks and shorelines, et cetera. If you're in coastal, it cranks it up a little more, and that assumes you're a few miles from any of those obstructions. And then if you're fully offshore, you click the offshore button, gain is cranked way out, and you're seeing targets as far as you can. Here's a view of some of those automatic functions. This is a Furuno brand machine. Ownership is at the top center, the big, large red vessel pointing south there. And they've got, right now in this area, there's steady rain throughout, but it's effectively cutting through all the rain. The only place that shows up that's potentially obscured is this big, large blob over on the east side where a big, heavy thunder cell is showing up as a big blob. So if there was a contact right under that, it might not see it, but you can see all of these AIS tracks down here are also sitting right on top of very strong radar returns. A few of these vessels that are not transmitting AIS are also doing very strong radar turns. And in the description on the Furuno site where I got this, it said that this vessel was in a massive storm that crossed the entire area.
What were the yellow things again?
These yellow things, these are just special purpose buoys throughout. And then, these are, all these little bananas here are vessels giving a big return. And it looks like they have target expansion turned on, which I'm not a big fan of because it makes every track look, like an aircraft carrier. Certainly makes them easier to see by eye. And if your radar does not have an auto tracking function, That may be helpful, but I will show you what I prefer if you don't have auto track. And again, I don't have auto track. Or auto detect. I have manual detect, meaning Tate, click, click, but auto tracking from that point on. And many of you, if you've got kind of mid-2000s era radars, you probably have the same thing. And then ways to use your radar for navigation reference to kind of add to the ways that we talked about this morning, the importance of, yes, I trust GPS very much and love my chart plotter, but I also occasionally look out the window and make sure that what I'm seeing on the chart, I'm passing, I should have, a major buoy on my starboard side. I look out the window and double check. Similarly, you can do that with radar. This shows radars that have an extended bearing line, or an EBL. That's these yellow or red lines. This is more kind of 80s, 90s era radar, or if you've got like 2000s or later, instead of turning on an extended bearing line and sweeping it around, you can just roll your cursor out or use the joystick and put your cursor out there, and the display will show you cursor position, bearing and range. And so you can click on, a point of land and say, hey, this, according to my track, that should bear, that looks like 245. Yep, sure enough, that matches what I've just done on radar. A great tool just to double check an approach course, you're bearing to a buoy, bearing to a landmass, et cetera. Always we want to check our progress by as many means available. Check your gauges as the aviation folks. Similarly, you can check the range to an object or do both bearing and range by rolling that cursor, same cursor out to validate your position. You can see this very distinct jetty or dock on the chart. You can, in this case, you've got split screen, but I'm a much bigger fan of, instead of splitting your screen, because the radar view is not always intuitive, I always run, and again, most modern multifunction display chart plotters will let you overlay the radar imagery right on top of your chart. We'll see in a later slide that it also lets you double check whether or not your radar is aligned properly. In this case, you can. There's some dock structure here, and the radar return lines up perfectly with it. It looks like it's a little left of this tip of the landmass, but that could be a low part that doesn't have a good radar return. The buoys, actually it does look a little off. It looks like, this buoy's right here, the return's right here. Buoys, of course, move on their chains with current, so I wouldn't be alarmed there. That looks pretty good, but it's intuitive. And so if you've got AIS tracks turned on and you see several AIS tracks, but then you see, let's say this blip starts moving towards the channel, again, on my radar, I've got to reach over and click and hit acquire target, and then it starts tracking and gives me course and speed. If you've got an auto target radar, and all the Doppler radars do that, it will immediately start a track on any moving object because it can detect the difference between motion and the nearby landmass. Again, this is, and of note, this is how I run in day and night conditions. It not only just keeps me current and good practice, but it will frequently, I will see on radar a blip that's a little further than I might have been looking with some small vessel zooming up the river or something draws my attention to it. Then I look out the window, I'm like, okay, now I see him. It's a helpful collision avoidance tool. This is the alignment issue. This display shows that the radar bearing is misaligned to its display data. Often happens in older radar sets like mine, and it can help, you can misidentify targets, and it'll also affect your closest point of approach, your collision avoidance calculations that the automatic radar plotting aid, or ARPA, is doing for you. So as you can see here, here's the shoreline, but the radar return is off a little bit. Here's an AIS track. You've got a big fat return on it, so it's probably a commercial ship, but it's, again, to the right a few degrees. This radar return off of this buoy is well off. This vessel is way off from its blip. So there's in your menu under radar setup, everybody's got a bearing adjustment where you just go in and just click it a few degrees to the left, and those would line up perfectly. Now here's kind of the poor man's auto detect, which is target trails. And you can see these, and again, on the, if those you've got really modern, very new Doppler radars, this is doing it automatically for you, and tracks should just start showing up and have little courses and speed vectors on them. If you don't have that, then you can turn on target trails, which basically leaves a little ghost image of the last several radar returns. And so, this is on ship, somebody's zooming up behind us, these few are underway, this guy's out in front. And so with each of these, again, on a radar like mine, I click on it, hit acquire target, acquire, wait about 10 or 15 seconds, and that's enough radar sweeps for it to do it on your own. Again, that's kind of poor man's auto detect, and then I manually do it. You can also set on, again, some older radars. The benefit of the new ones is they do this all on your own. You can set radar guard zones, and you define bearing, port and starboard. You can either do them in true. In this case, this is a heading up, so the bow of the boat is straight at the top of the screen, and they've entered 2 different guard zones, so as soon as a valid detection occurs inside of that section, you get an alarm. Now, it's not the same as an auto track zone, which some radars have, where as soon as it penetrates that, you start a new track and you start to get tracks on the vessel. It's nice to be able to put them out from your own vessel so that you don't, like if you did an auto detection really close around own ship, then some of that clutter around own ship that is normal is going to start generating false tracks, and it'll look like you're surrounded by boats. You don't want that. So you want to create that auto track sector way out, a mile or 2 away, 5 miles out. And then the automated piece is, here's a kind of example of a mix of the need for manual tracking. This is a shot from Gibraltar, Strait of Gibraltar, typical of the traffic there. On ship, you can see is just entering the inner harbor approaches to Gibraltar there, and a whole mix of AIS targets and their returns, but then a whole bunch of other vessels who either you're still out of range, or their AIS is not working, their antenna's bad, they aren't transmitting, lots of smugglers in that area, so that could be what's happening there. But clearly the need for manual tracking here. And again, as soon as you start manual track, it will calculate your collision. Excuse me, this is, I think, this is a kind of medium-age Garmin. Same function there. It's once you've started the track, and you can see here it's the acquire target button, and then you just click on each dot. Once you've done that, then it is calculating course and speed, and depending on which displays you have turned on, here's their course, 060 magnetic, how fast they're going, and if there's a collision risk, then it will also tell you either dangerous target, it's calculated that, it's telling you on that target there, and it hooks it or shows it in some way, or frequently, like on mine, the target turns red and begins to blink, and a very quiet alarm as well. Any questions on radar, tuning, et cetera, before we move to our next topic, which is anchoring? Sir?
Gentleman over here asked about storms.
Yes.
So on your 24 or 36 mile range, can you see storms?
Absolutely. No, your question is, can you see storms on a radar that's capable of a 24 or 36 mile? Absolutely. Because then, your beam is going up into the sky, so you can certainly see the squall lines coming, and they're very distinct on radar. That another reason why if you might want to turn down that rain clutter so that you could see the squall line coming, and depending on how far you are and how fast your boat is, you can sometimes maneuver around, or at least it may change your plans and you pull into port sooner because you can see that squall line advancing. Great question. So next topic is on anchoring, and last year this was part of the survey data from the voyage planning class that we did. We talked briefly about anchoring, and a couple of questions came up under the cross-training piece, and I certainly have a number of friends at the marina who rarely, if ever, anchor. And I personally believe that's because they don't know how to do it right, probably. But I want them to experience the joy of spending the night on the hook or anchoring somewhere and going swimming with friends or whatever. But also, part of that cross-training thing is sometimes anchoring the vessel is the safest thing you can do, especially in the midst of a casualty response situation. If I had fire or flooding, or I've only got a single screw fast trawler, so I've only got one shot, but if I had loss of one engine or some other mechanical issue that wasn't an immediate crisis mayday situation, but I really needed to deal with it, getting out of traffic into some semi-protected area, or it doesn't even have to be protected if it's just a short time, dropping the anchor then lets me fully focus on the casualty, getting that taken care of. If I had a person injured or something, that'd be a perfect time to do that. And so having anchoring at your disposal and practiced and having it in your back pocket as one of your most important kind of backstops of safety and prudent seamanship to me is critical. So if any of you don't anchor because you're not familiar with it, we're going to go in depth into this, or because you've tried it a few times and you dragged anchor. We had an experience in South River last year, I think. We were anchored with several other boats, hanging out, swimming, whatever, and this charter power big catamaran came up, and charter stuff all over the side, and the dad drives up, and he's got a bunch of family and friends with him, drops the hook, and just drops the hook. It's 12 feet of water, and he might have put 20 feet of scope out or something. And I can just see him dragging. I'm like, man, I wish he'd put out some more scope. And he pulls up the thing. Now the kids, I can hear them complaining. They're just right over there. Pulls forward, drops it again. And I'm guessing he expected that like an anchor is some magical claw that just holds you to the bottom. If only, and in fact, I actually got on the radio, I wasn't trying to be directive. I was just like, hey, just want to let you know, I've been here for a while, and with these winds today, you might want to put out some more scope. Blaming it on the winds, when in fact, he just didn't have enough scope out. But he was not monitoring his radio like we all should on channel 13 and 16, and so he never answered, and eventually, after 3 or 4 tries, they just steamed away. And his very pissed off kids were yelling at him and all this stuff because they didn't get to go swimming, and they could see all of us swimming anyway. So we'll get to all of that, but let's first, we covered this in NAV 101, but actually I went a little over time, so I'm happy, especially for those who are here this morning, to go a little more in depth. But I want to review some of the key takeaways. With exception of the Danforth anchor, if you have any of the plow, claw, or spade design modern anchors, I personally own a Lumar Delta, and I've never had any anchoring challenges. Now, if I do get a new anchor at any point, it'll be a Rachna or a Mantis, and I'll show you why. Lloyd's engineering certification group has a classification of high holding power, and then a better one that they used to call very high holding power. They now call it super high holding power. As you can see, the only one, it's like, for those of you who've seen, this is Spinal Tap. We turn it up to 11. It's super holding power. But they've got a rating, they test it, they do big pulls, and they put identical anchors and identical loads, and they test how quickly they come out and their total pulling, et cetera. As you can see, there are pros and cons to every one, and again, I'm not down on the Danforth, and the reason I highlight that, exceptional in soft sand, which is in many cases of the Chesapeake ideal. The other is that the Danforth anchor nicely folds flat. Fortress brand makes them out of bomb-proof aluminum alloy, and when they fold flat, they can be neatly hung inside a locker by their stock. And so having a Danforth as your backup secondary anchor is an incredible idea because it's lightweight. They're very strong when they're lightweight, and their holding power is because of the surface area of their flukes. Their flukes are huge, therefore they can get away with aluminum construction or relatively lightweight, and again, because they're flat. Now, I also see some configurations where Danforths are stowed on deck, and they've got little places to bolt right on deck. That just sounds like a toe breaker, ankle breaker waiting to happen. Find a locker that's got a vertical wall, like the back side of your bow locker or something like that, and have that as your backup anchor. Yes, sir, question back.
Yeah, I have a question, actually it's two, but what's the procedure in case one of the anchors gets stuck when you put it down?
We will get to that for sure. The most, truly fouled on an obstruction certainly does happen. But in fact, another great little anchoring story that we were in the Magathie River, anchored nearby big group of boats, and one boat with all the party in the boat, they were anchored, or they had an anchor out, and they were all like hanging back on floaties on the back of their boat, and this little, express cruiser is just drifting through the anchorage with boat after boat after boat yelling at them until they got next to me, and I was also encouraging them. And the response from the woman in the water was, and I was like, you need to put out more scope. Well, I can't do that. If we do that, we'll get stuck. Well, in fact, there's another word for stuck. It's anchored. So the experience that some people may have, and we'll get to this on the getting underway after you've anchored, is that, well, I set it, and now I'm going to pull back with the engine to try and break it free. That's called anchored, and you will just get more anchored, like that lady said. So she had 20 feet out in a 10-foot anchorage and was just drifting through the anchorage on her way to collide with some other boats downwind. But the primary thing is you are moving the boat forward, we'll get to this in the procedure part, until you are pretty much directly over the boat. And then, just look at the design of any of these anchors, you are now on the back of the stock, pivoting and breaking it out of the bottom, clay, mud, sand, etc. Now, when you're truly stuck is when any of the points on these anchors is under a big rock, or worst case, under some obstruction like an old car that's on the bottom or something like that. In that case, changing the angle and trying to do gentle pulls at all different angles from where you originally anchored, that will break it free like 95% of the time. We'll talk about a retrieval line in a couple of slides. Potentially effective tool, and almost every one of these anchors has a little point where you can tie a retrieval line at the top, a little top there on the Rockna, and then if you're anchoring, we'll see it in a minute, you run a line with a buoy, so then if you do really get stuck, then you can pull the boat forward, take in your rode until you grab that light line, and now you're hauling at a completely different angle, and that should pull it out. It's an effective tool, but I think you should only use that in an area in which you really are in doubt as to debris on the bottom. Actually getting stuck in rocks is, yes, you can get stuck in rocks, but changing the angle will get you out. If it's like an old commercial harbor and there may, no kidding, be debris or other anchors there, that's when you might want to consider doing the float. The tests that are behind this, and I realize this is an eye chart, but multiple sources and all these different groups, sail, boat owner, practical sailor, some European group on the upper right, have done some very standardized testing, and you can see they look at the max strain before releasing is in green, total max pull, stable dragging. The upper right there, they compared what's best for soft sand, hard sand, etc. The one that has, the reason I mentioned the Fortress anchor, which is a Danforth style anchor, that's this one with a red with a plus, like basically whatever standard pulling method that they used, measured in newtons of pull. When they got well past the 5,000 Newton mark, they stopped the test. So the Fortress anchor in soft sand is ideal because of the surface area of those huge flukes. But again and again, you see those very modern, pointy, and unfortunately expensive Mantis and Rockna doing really good performance here. I circled my own delta to say, hey, I'm doing pretty well. They didn't include I've got a 44 pound, which is a 20 kilogram. It looks like Delta's getting better at 15.9 kilos. They didn't do a 20 kilo. They stopped all at 15. So I think Delta 20 kilo might have been up here. But anyway, I'm satisfied that I'm not at risk, but I can see that for a little more money in the future, I might do a Rachna or Mantis, but I'm not, I'm not steaming in Ushuaia or Patagonia and anchoring in 100 feet of water with an all-chain rode anytime soon. So, yes, sir.
What's equivalent to Chesapeake Bay mud?
I'm sorry?
What's equivalent to Chesapeake Bay mud?
It's, that's all of our loamy mud here is kind of a mix of mud and sand. So, this happens to be specifically a soft sand. I think you'd see, and I said, based on all of this data, some of this is bottom specific, others is, in a standard bottom, they just did a major pull on them. The fact that I see all of these anchor types on that previous slide performing well in all of those, I'd say yes, they're all good anchors. Again, the Danforth has some disadvantages, but if that's your only anchor, you're probably good with it. When in doubt, it's really all about the weight does matter, and the scope that you have out. So if you're worried about any one of your anchors, or you don't think, we'll get to weight specific on this slide, if you think you're underweighted, just put up more line, more scope. Yes, sir.
Going back to retrieving anchors that stuck in rock, and you're pulling from different points.
Mm-hmm.
Do you leave your snubber attached?
No, I would. Well, I mean, depends on your tackle, meaning what all of your anchor gear is. You never want to put excessive strain on the windlass, and so getting close up and then taking your chain to a cleat so that you don't rip your windlass off. Or if you are around your windlass, you're only using it for the foundation and its strength. You aren't actually trying to power your way out with a 12 volt or a 24 volt motor to get it out. I would attach to the strongest point on the vessel and try gentle pulling in various directions. All right, so size does matter in anchors, and so what I've done is just pulled up, again, I pulled it up for my anchor, but every one of you has, and this is not about the vessel, this is you go to the anchor maker's website to pull this table. This is from the Lumar website, and it's for the Delta anchor. I have the galvanized Delta on our boat. And so our boat is a 42-foot Legacy fast trawler. I'm very close to this Grand Banks. Ours is 37,000 pounds loaded dry weight. I'm not talking displacement, actual what the boat weighs when they put it on the lift. And so that's its total capacity to pull against the anchor. And then every boat's, here we are at three very different 42-foot vessels with very different levels of windage and wetted surface in the water. So all of these charts that I found on Lumar's and on Rachna and everybody else, their table is based on vessel length only. And so, the extra almost 4 or 5 tons between this 42-foot length vessel and this 42-foot length vessel adds additional risk. And so in the fine print, it says lighter shading represents the limits of the model. So they put a lot of data in with real tests, and if I drop into this chart on the red line, which is 42 feet, it hits the next one kind of in the middle of a 35-pound anchor. That's the recommended anchor. However, that's for a generic 42-foot boat. I've got a flying bridge and some extra windage, etc. So it says, if in doubt, I'm sorry that got obscured, lighter shading represents the limit of the model. As you approach the limits of the model, move up to the next size anchor. And so that would say move up. So I have now, and in fact I thought I had a 44, and yes I do. I went down, I've got a 20 kilogram Delta anchor. I'm in this zone. So in theory, I've got on board my 42-foot vessel, one that is suitable for 50 feet, in this range. It's peak performance. I'm completely happy with that. If I started into the 55, that's starting to become a little effort to manhandle. We do have an electric windlass, but our windlass failed 2 summers ago, and I was happy to have, teenagers at home with and every windlass has got a spot in the top, either depending on the brand. Wilcox Crittenden has a manual crank handle like this. Most of them got to have a standard sailing winch handle receptacle. I have one of those, and so got a good workout for my son and his friends, and my daughter and her friends, manually retrieving our anchor until I finally figured out what the simple electrical problem was. But if I had a 55-pounder, that would have been pretty hard and clearly excessive. Already at 44, I'm over the recommended limit, and I'm happy with overachieving in terms of ground tackle. Was there a question back here? No, okay. All right, checking my time. All right, good. So let's talk about just kind of setting up, be ready. Some of you may have, raise your hand if you have all chain rode, some sailboaters, I'm assuming, or you've just got bomb-proof ground tackle. I do not. Many of us have a mix of chain and nylon or chain and polyester. Not a bad setup either way. Again, I would love to have all chain rode. Certainly you can get away with a lot less scope if in most conditions, because the weight of the chain is helping hold you on the bottom. Typically, if you've got that chain to nylon or chain to polyester setup, the chain, it's a rule of thumb, should be the length of the boat at a minimum. Now, same with mine, I've got a 42-foot boat. I think I've got either 25 or 30 feet of chain. I probably need to move up to 50 feet of chain, and I've got 250 feet of, maybe even 300 feet of nylon line. I have marked my chain and rode in 25 feet color-coded increments, so as it's going out on deck, I know how much I've got out, and we'll get to why you need to know what that is. Some of you may have chain counters, where you can, as you power out, you see the click, 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 how many feet of chain. I do not have that. That's a beautiful thing to have, so you don't have to spray paint your road. There's the standard nylon line is the 3-strand, bomb-proof, very solid. It does tend to harden in the marine environment and can keep the kinks in. One way to help with that is to always use a swivel. We'll talk about one of the risks of the swivel. Multi-plate is much softer, more strong, and takes up less space, but it's a little more expensive. Your shackle in that upper right photo should be, shackled, single shackle from the chain to the anchor, and then seize the pin with either stainless or Monel wire so that the pin will never back out. And of note, that shackle should be rated to the breaking strength of the chain as opposed to the working strength or working load expected. Basically, if you don't do that, then you're creating, and you don't want a deliberate weak link there. You want it rated at the same or better as the rated strength. All the good anchors have got an elongated oval slot that you can put the entire shackle through easily and then shackle it down. If you've got a swivel, there's lots of articles out there about, swivels are a terrible idea, they're the weak link. Same thing, you buy a swivel that's rated for the working strength of the chain, but in order to prevent, the bad scenario is if you had a swivel in the first position, like that upper photo, then the swivel itself, as the boat moves around the anchor, is subject to side loading that the swivel is not designed to handle. It only wants a straight pull. So you add a short length of chain between the anchor and the swivel, then you eliminate any side loading, but you've got the benefit of eliminating kink and twists. It'll go back into your chain locker more smoothly. It'll go around your wildcat of your capstan more smoothly. So I encourage the swivel, but only if you've got this setup. Is there a question back here? No, okay, good. And then finally, here's how you do it. And as we talked about with those examples, scope is the key. Assuming that you've got an anchor that is the proper size for your vessel based on the manufacturer's chart. When in doubt, move up one weight. Start with, as I talked about with Bridge Resource Management, brief the plan with good comms, get the anchor ready, stop the boat, with the slightest sternway on. You can look at the bubbles in the water, et cetera, make sure that you're truly moving astern. Just a bump astern, and then go right back to neutral. You do not want to be powering down as your anchor's laying on the bottom. It's in quotes. That's a command to the deck crew if you actually have a manual release or someone's up forward running it with the foot pedal. Let go of the anchor. If you're doing it free fall, fully release the brake and let it fall. And so now we're going to set the anchor. Your boat is creeping backwards, and if you don't have enough sternway, you don't want, especially if you've got all chain rode, you do not want the chain to pile up. So you truly want a little bit of sternway. You might bump it astern again just for a few seconds and then back to neutral to make sure that you're laying the chain out nicely on the bottom. And of course, with all this, I probably should have put this, you are pointing bow into whichever's having a greater effect on you, wind or current, because you want to set so that your bow's into what's pushing you down and help set the anchor. And then wait until the scope is at least 5-to-1. That's why it's handy to have either the chain counter or your lines painted. How much scope is 5-to-1? Well, here's a great little diagram on the left. This boat, you measure, you want it basically 5 times the depth of the water plus the distance from your bow roller to the water. So in the case of this vessel, the bow height is 3 feet above the water. They're in 7 feet of water actual, so that's 10 goes into the ratio 5-to-1. So a 5-to-1 ratio gets you 50 feet. And briefly, once you're at that point, set the brake. And if you've got the ability to tighten or secure the windlass, if you've powered down, you just don't touch anything, and the windlass will briefly take the strain. Briefly engage stern thrust just for a moment, and you're just digging those flukes in. And at 5-to-1, the pull is effectively horizontal, right on the bottom. The flukes of the anchor dig in. Watch the anchor rode. What you don't want to see is the chain or the line go fully taut and then drop to the deck slack, and then fully taut and drop to the deck. That means the anchor itself is bouncing along the bottom and briefly holding and then releasing. If that's happening, let out more line so you get the anchor bevel. Then now pay out the remaining scope, again with slight sternway, the occasional bump astern, and then get it out to these recommended ratios. I also like kind of in between a standard day anchorage, 6-to-1, there's 6 feet in a fathom. I can do the math quickly, and 6-to-1 to me is the minimum. The calm lunch stop. I borrowed this diagram from Boat US Foundation. 5-to-1's a little light, especially if you've got a mix of chain and nylon. If you've got all chain, 5-to-1's great. Yes.
I was going to ask if you have all chain, do these chains?
Absolutely, yeah. At the fine print at the bottom right, all chain roads can get away with lower ratios, 4-to-1, 6-to-1, 8-to-1. I mean, a 10-to-1 ratio is, storm quality anchor setting for my boat. If you're in 10 feet of water, that's 100 feet of full road out for a combination of nylon and chain. 20 feet of water, that's 200 feet. You aren't going anywhere. And even if the current changes and the wind changes and you turn around and the chain's moving around, the anchor pops out because of that very low angle pull. It will reset itself every time, and you're not going to drag.
Can you actually let out too much scope?
There's no such thing as too much scope. That was a question earlier. No such thing. It's just more trouble to get in, and then especially if your windlass fails. If you're
Swing, I guess.
Yes, now your swing circle is certainly a challenge. If you're in a crowded anchorage, and if you're in a well-protected anchorage, that's why that 6-to-1, 7-to-1, 8-to-1 is reasonable. You're not generating a massive swing. And if we had a question on the lunch break, how do you anchor in a group if you're, a pack of boats are in some protected spot? You pull up right behind the vessel that you're going to park, or anchor behind, maybe 20 or 30 feet behind their stern, and their alarmed friends in the water are like, "Whoa, he's way too close." You drop anchor there and then back away. Their anchor's on the other side of their vessel. Your anchor's there. If all of you swing around, you can never hit them, and your anchors will never foul. So that's the pre-plot. There are some other variations, and we had the question earlier about how do you get out of a fouled area. That is on the far right there, the anchor retrieval, trip line, and buoy technique. I've done this in the Navy, not to retrieve it, it's just to mark where the anchor is. It's a great tool for practice, and we know where the anchor is and see how we're tending. But the line is far too light to pull up, a 6,000 pound anchor, so it's not there for that. But it's just to show the position. In this case, you can see one product available by Jim Bowie, and the reason it's got that slit in the side and you can roll up some line is you want to put out only as much line as is the highest expected height of water from the anchor to the water, so that it will move very little and it will always mark the spot of your anchor. It's helpful once you get back underway. Also warns other people, where your anchor is so they don't drop around on top of yours. There is a risk of fouling and twisting the line with the anchor, so some recommendations include, once you do that, at least you've got your trip line ready, then once you've set the anchor, then you can motor back up and retrieve the buoy, let out more line, and lay back. So now you've got both anchor and buoy line. You just got to be careful. You got two things to deal with, one by hand, one by windlass, as you're getting ready to weigh anchor. But if you were truly in a very doubtful bottom, you might want to do that. Relatively light line, some 3/8 Dyneema or something like that, that's strong enough to be able to really lift, but light enough not to get blown around. On the left side you may have heard of kellets or anchor sentinels. These are heavy objects that you somehow either tie to your, hook into the anchor chain or send down the road to create a little bit of extra catenary. That's the sag in the line. The bottom left data is from a pull test, which shows kellets do not help for increased holding. And again, I've never used a kellet. They don't help for increased holding. What they do a good job of is they increase, it's a shock absorber. The weight itself is pulling that down and shortens your total swing in a crowded anchorage. That can be helpful also for sailboats with like fin keels, that as the boat might turn around its own line, the kellet makes sure that you never trip over your own anchor chain.
Okay.
Yes.
On the previous screen, right there, second number 10, plot drag circles. Are we talking about an anchor alarm here?
Sure. Okay. Yes.
If so, do you plot it at the drop, or do you plot it when you're fully out?
Great question. If you, most chart plotters have an anchor watch function, and they will have two choices. There's also, I can't remember the name of the app that I use, Anchor Buddy, Anchor Pro. The Anchor Pro app does the same thing. It gives you the choice of right when you let go of the anchor, you press the button on your chart plotter or you press the button on your Anchor Pro. Lots of other apps out there, but that happens to be the one I use. I'm not in any way endorsing that one. There's several others. But or after you've anchored, and I'm thinking, anchor watch is important. I'm confident in my anchoring, but I also need some indication of whether or not I'm dragging or not. And so setting the alarm, all those tools, whether it's an app or your chart plotter, gives you the choice of telling it how much line you have out, and it's between where the key is, it's where the GPS antenna is to the anchor point. And so if you've got 100 feet of line out, that's from the bow roller where the little mark is right on deck, but then your antenna is on your mast. That's another, you need to add that, because if you don't, then you'll be right on the edge of the actual distance. If you do it right when you drop, and I'm at about 30% remembering to have my app handy when I'm doing that, it certainly is of lower importance to me than safely watching people on deck. So sometimes I forget, but it is very effective. Is right when it goes in the water, you hit anchor point, and then it knows exactly where the anchor is, and then you set how much distance you're willing to allow before it alarms. Yes?
Should you recommend a secondary anchor?
If the secondary anchor is a great tool if, say, you're in, like you're on the Great Loop or you're in the Intercoastal or something like that, and you're anchored in some narrow creek, you want people to be able to get by, and you want to make sure that you don't swing, into the sides, and you're specifically restricted Then setting a second anchor, which is, basically in this scenario, instead of 8 to 1, you briefly lay out like 16 to 1, and then drop your stern anchor. That's a great use for that Danforth temporary anchor with its own, maybe 10 feet of chain and a totally separate line. Then you motor forward and take in scope so that you're 8 to 1 forward and 8 to 1 aft. Now you're not going anywhere, however the current or wind changes. But I would think, it's a lot of work to do that. The benefit to me would be defined by the area that you're in.
You would still use these numbers if you were in, say, a small cove and you were going to stern tie?
With stern tie, that's effectively a second anchor where you've anchored. You put your anchor out in a little bit deeper water, then you're backing in, fully setting the anchor, and then running a line ashore to tie to a tree or something like that. I think you could get away with less, but I wouldn't go any less than 5 to 1 ever. I mean, just because your stern tie to the tree is going to be the strongest purchase of all, and now you've tied yourself to a lee shore. If the weather comes around, I'd want a good 6 or 7 to 1. Calm, you never know until the storm comes up. There we go. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Question back here.
If you're anchored close to the coastline, when you don't want to get too close, which direction should the bow be pointing? I mean, if you point it towards the channel as a tight spot, your anchor could be close to the channel. So which direction should?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The question is, where do you put your bow? If you're in a day anchorage, I said you point bow into the prevailing current, et cetera. If you're in an overnight scenario, like in that protected cove, where depending on weather, and you can check your weather in Windy or some other app and say, oh yeah, it's going to be a west wind all night long. It could change, squall lines come through. I would say you're putting your bow towards the prevailing or expected wind and weather, but your entire swing circle, which is the arc that your entire boat will make around the length of line and chain that you have out, if at any point that swing circle encounters another boat or any obstruction or shallows or shore, you are not anchored in a safe spot. I mean, that entire circle has to be safe water because you could always turn. And that may be also where your second anchor scenario might play out. Of note, if you do use one of these anchor apps and you're playing music on Spotify from your stereo, and you go into the kayak or the dinghy just a few feet away over the stereo, because the app thinks that the boat has dragged because I took my phone with me on the kayak. So leave the music on the boat. Okay, so equipment configuration. Now, some of these we're going to get into some specifics, but these are general things. Setting up your chart plotter for success. We went into this in depth in the, no pun intended, in the last one. Your display should be intuitive, so you want to make sure that it's at a glance. Your chart is totally intuitive on the screen. As you can see on these paper charts, I've done what your chart plotter does for you automatically. My boat draws 4 feet 11, so I have drawn magenta felt line everywhere that there's 6 feet or less. So a few little spots here down outside the chop tank that are 6 feet or less, so that if I were navigating on the paper chart in the fog of war or with distractions on board, I wouldn't steam towards those areas. Similarly, setting up your chart plotter such that you set safety depth at the right color, so that for me, I set safety depth at 6 feet. So everything that's 6 feet or less shows as dark blue. And we'll see that on subsequent slides on the difference between that. We went over that in depth this morning. But talk about viewing your reading your gauges. If you don't set the safety depth setting, then the entire bay is different shades of blue. With safety depth set at 6 feet, for me, everything 6 and below is dark blue, everything 6 to 12 is light blue, and everything greater than 12 is white. I know I can go anywhere that's white on my chart plotter. I need to be careful and pay attention. If I go light blue, that's 6 to 12, and I can never go below in the dark blue. Question? Oh, sorry. Somewhere. Oh, yes, sir. Okay.
Yeah, this is a question for those prior to this. If you're coming into to a cove, and there's multiple boats already there.
Right.
In the afternoon or night, and you know you're gonna be mooring there, anchoring there for the night or the afternoon. How could you figure it out if your boat, let's just say it's a 45 footer, and there's another 30 footer over there? How much change do they have? So when we are swinging, that boat, they might have 100 feet out,
Right.
or that some one that has 50 feet out. How do I know when we're all sort of going with the wave of the wind? When I place my boat in a specific area to say, if he has 100, I gotta be here. If they're
Yep. No, that.
It'll be here. How do I kind of gauge?
No, great question. How do you plan in a crowded anchorage? There's a point at which, if you're having those thoughts, you may not need to anchor there initially. Like you come in, it's like, oh, I'm not quite so sure. The example I spoke of earlier, whereas it's just you and one other boat, you steam up right behind them, you drop your hook, you know you're good. What you're talking about is the vessel on your beam. If he's 100 feet away, but he's got more than 100 feet of scope out, he could swing into me.
Yeah.
So certainly talking on the radio, if you don't get a satisfactory answer, you need to move. I mean, there's definitely
But there is no kind of, let's just say that somebody doesn't know, I'm gonna drop 200 feet.
Right, they could.
There's a system. How do I kind of gauge or know, or should I call to say, hey?
I would call, and you will know probably immediately if the person actually knows what they're talking about. And the answer may be, I have no idea. I just put it out until I stopped. And you hear banjos playing in the background and stuff. It's like, okay, you need to find a new anchorage. If you get crystal clarity from somebody like me who's got their anchor line marked, and it's like I've got 110 feet on deck, and it's an all-chain road, or it's a mix of chain and nylon or whatever, you can assess. But when in doubt, I'd get a little farther away. I mean, there's definitely a FIFO, first in, first out kind of behavior. It's whoever's there already has the right to be there. You can't make them move or whatever. So, back to equipment configuration. We talked earlier in depth this morning about north up versus heading up. North up is what I'm used to. It's what all the charts and the books and the guides are displayed like. But for like with Ashley and I, Ashley prefers heading up, which is like Google Maps or Waze sitting on the dash of your car. I've done 28 years plus of north up navigation. I shouldn't expect Ashley to suffer my, Navy OCD scars. So we just talked about it. It's like, I'm always north up, and like, especially when we're steaming south, it's like, wait, I'm going south, so I want to turn left, but that's right on the screen. If that is already making your head churn, and many of you already steam with head up, there's pros and cons of both. And to me, classic crew resource management, whatever you're most comfortable with and your crew's most comfortable with, then that's what you ought to go. And so I'll probably make sure our main display probably will be in head up, and I'll keep my little iPad running Navionics on north up, just because that's what I want to see, But I'm foot stomp here. It ought to be bold and blinking. Disable the auto turn mode with autopilot. Many of you, like me, have an autopilot that talks to or is capable of talking to the plotter. And when you get to a waypoint on an active route, the boat will turn itself. Holy moly. Think about how would that happen in your car when the lady on Google Maps is telling you, turn left now, and your car did it and slammed you into another car. You could run aground, you could run into traffic. Very dangerous feature. Find it and disable it. Not a fan. Maybe in open ocean only if you're going to Bermuda, let it make the turns for you. But even then, it's like you could be passing another contact at that point and violate the rules of the road with your automatic waypoint turn. Instead, mine alarms and tells me waypoint 14 reached, and then I can make a decision. Course over ground vector, absolute believer in course over ground. We mentioned that this morning. That lets you see the difference between your heading and the effects of current. So you see where the boat's actually going over ground as opposed to where your bow is pointed and your compass tells you. There's choices between most detail or less detail. Always select the most detailed view. By dialing back details, you also dial back soundings and other critical data. And then zoom in, zoom out. Some warnings and obstructions even are only available on lower zoom levels, so zoom in on modern digital charts. And are your digital charts up to date? If, like mine, you have an older CMAP-based chip that you have to pull out of your chart plotter, if you have not, within the past 6 months, pulled that out, taken it home, put it into your Garmin or Raymarine branded little chip reader and plugged it into a USB port on your computer and gone to the website and updated your charts, then you are in danger, no kidding. And if you haven't done that the entire time you've owned your boat, then you have been at risk every time you've been underway. If you've got super new, fancy Garmin and Raymarine and other brand glass cockpit, beautiful Doppler radar, full suite, God bless you. I want to come sailing with you. Yours is doing it if you have it turned on. It's either Bluetooth enabled or Wi-Fi enabled, and it is the Bluetooth meaning your Garmin is talking through your phone every time you're on board, or is Wi-Fi enabled when you're at the marina. It is reaching out and getting the latest chart updates every time you're connected to Wi-Fi. You have to find that in the menu if you were fortunate enough to have one of those beautiful new units, because you have to have the most current charts. And it's a choice in there. I would hope your dealer installed it and turned it on, but especially if you bought a used boat and it was already there, you need to triple check. Speaking of buying boats that were somebody else's in the past, that screen at the bottom right of if your radio says no MMSI, I took this picture on the screen of a friend at the dock, or I didn't have a picture of it, but another friend there, they have one of these icons at the upper right, and instead of latitude, longitude in the little screen next to 16, it had all zeros. And if you've got that situation in either of your displays, and usually for MMSI, you have to go into the digital selective calling menu to find what your MMSI number is. The MMSI number is the number of the electronic signature of the boat. It stays with the boat forever, it doesn't go with you. But if either of those are true, then the most, if not the most valuable, one of the most valuable search and rescue things that came along with Rescue 21 almost 20 years ago from the Coast Guard is digital selective calling. That little red button at the bottom right of that icon, it's like, launching a missile. You flip the red cover, press the button for 5 seconds. That calls help, sending your boat's information, description, name, color, type of vessel, length, all that, and your precise latitude, longitude position over channel 70, the digital selective calling channel, and help is on the way. And so if you don't have an MMSI number, then all of that vessel description stuff is not attached there. If you've bought a boat and you have not updated the data associated with MMSI, just Google update your MMSI information and you'll find the website to do it. You then get to put your name and your emergency contact, but mostly the description of the vessel, you just check it. In theory, it's always been there. If you don't have a number, then none of that information is going to get transmitted, so you get to register for a number. If you're a Boat US member, you can do it for free. They'll do it for $25 if you're not a member, but they're only going to give you a United States only MMSI number that starts with a 9. If you plan on traveling to Canada or anywhere internationally, then you have to get a ship radio license, take the test, it's easy, and then you register for a real international MMSI number that is you're allowed to use in other countries. The GPS position is arguably the most important. It's nice for them to know as the helicopter's flying out to save me that my vessel is wide over blue hull, 42-foot powerboat. But most important is they need to know where to go. And so there is a GPS wire input into the back of your radio, and if it shows no position, then all they get is an audible alert. The Rescue 21 antennas around the area are pretty good at triangulating your transmission, but it's not nearly as good as instantly transmitting your position, which will show up on the screens of all the boats around you whose radio is interfaced into their multifunction display. And so you'll see that. Sometimes you'll hear it maybe on the radio. You'll hear this excruciating alarm coming out of your VHF. The screen will say, DSC alert. It'll show the position, and if your radio is tied to your MFD, then that will show up as a blinking target in distress, and if they're close to you, you're obligated to go help them. You'll be the first one there. So please check your radios when you go to your boat next. Yes, question?
What about having an EPIRB? Do we need those if we have this, or do you not recommend using them? Or?
EPIRB, the electronic position indicating radio beacon, a great little portable separate device that floats and pops out and transmits its position to the satellites, and they come save you. I think most effective for offshore transits, because the DSC, it's a VHF radio transmission, so it only is detected by antennas nearby that are capable of DSC receiving VHF radio. The Coast Guard's towers are really tall, so they can probably detect a DSC call, I don't know the specifics, I'm guessing 100 or 200 miles offshore from the US. If you're beyond that and you're going to Bermuda or you're doing a transatlantic, then having an EPIRB is prudent. If you do a lot of ocean transits, few of us do, I haven't yet in my retail or personal vessels. They're also, if you're doing a single trip, like say the people who do the Great Loop, and the only part of the Great Loop that's truly offshore and overnight is the going across the armpit of Florida, that's more than a 24-hour transit. If you are concerned, a lot of people do that with buddy boats and several people travel together, and so one boat's truly in trouble, the other boats can help them out. But you can also rent an EPIRB. Boat US has this rental system, and so just for, I don't know what the cost is, but a very modest charge compared to the expense of an EPIRB, you can rent one for one journey, and then you ship it back to them. Question?
Yes, if you get MMSI through both US, it's only for US, but if you then you cannot do it for Bahamas.
Correct. You can go, but in theory, you are violating international radio rules.
Now, if you get another post out internationally, then you have to reprogram that radio.
You do. You have to.
Send it back to the manufacturer.
Depends on the brand. I have an older ICOM that it lets me change it, but I think there's a limit. I actually entered my own in there when I bought the boat. Actually, that picture that's our radio when I bought the boat. And so it's a 2005 boat. We bought it in 2018. The previous owner had been running without, it was connected to GPS, so it would transmit a position, but he'd never registered MMSI on the boat, and therefore none of that data was available. I got an MMSI number, and mine is old enough radio, I could just program it myself. I think some of the newest ones, you have to, in theory, send it to the factory, but the guys over here, MTS, they have the thing, whatever it is that they can plug into your radio, a magic box. So you don't have to ship it anywhere. Go to MTS, they do great work. They've done work for me in the past on our boat, and they can reprogram anybody's gear.
Yeah, another question on AIS. I know there's a site called marinetraffic.com. You can see all the ships you have.
Yes.
Now, does that mean you have your AIS transmitter on, can you show up on that site?
In fact, it's funny. I tweaked this chart or this slide for the morning class because we talked about AIS in detail. Poor man's AIS, and before we got an AIS transmitter, thank you, Christmas present from Ashley a few years ago, I only had receive only, and I only had it in the form of the Marine Traffic app. Now, please note, you can go to the Marine Traffic website on your phone, and then you get to see all the other vessels that have been detected by terrestrial antennas. You got to go close enough to one to be detected, so it's not showing every AIS track, but if you're in a busy area, you probably will. But if you get the app, then in addition to all the other boats, your boat shows in the center, and you've got a chart view. It's not navigation quality, but it really is. It's a perfect chart, and your boat is cruising along, and you can see the other AIS tracks. But AIS is not a panacea. Only vessels 200 tons or greater are required to have it in the United States. Please raise your hand if you have an AIS transmitter in the room. So even less than this morning, so we're at maybe 20%. And raise your hand if you have an AIS receive only unit. Man, we're at maybe 25 to 30% can see the AIS tracks, and 20% of the room are actually transmitting their own position. All the rest of us are invisible to your Marine Traffic app. It's a nice tool. In fact, I recently did a vessel delivery for a client and brought a boat back from Long Island through New York City and Hellgate and all that back to Harrington South, and the boat did not have AIS on it. He has since done a big electronics upgrade, and so using the marine traffic app as we were coming through New York City, I was able to call a couple of commercial vessels. There was one, a dredge working. I wanted to make sure, could we go by at normal speed or did we need to slow down? There's another vessel broadcasting their position on the or their name on the radio and a vague description. They were doing diving operations. I saw them on the app in relation to our own position, knew which one they were, called them on the radio, made passing arrangements, that kind of thing. So it's a great tool, but it assumes a cooperative target, meaning somebody is actually transmitting.
If you're offshore, they're not going to see you.
What's that? Oh yeah, yeah. Of course, they never saw me because I was. I mean, the app. To be clear, the AIS receive-only app only displays other ships. It does not transmit. So you've got to have a transmitter. And the nice thing is, the transmit side has come down in cost. So if you're considering adding AIS to your boat, just pay the. I mean, it's like the difference is like 600 versus 800. Get the full transmit capability. You'll feel better, and all the 20% of you will have a lower chance of colliding with you and certainly all commercial ships will see you well in advance. All right, now we're going to jump into voyage planning, and I plan voyages. I'm talking a long distance, more than a trip to Rock Hall or whatever. Still don't understand what the Rock Hall excitement is about. They've got a sweet little store with ice cream. And we asked earlier, did I ask private aviators, any private pilots in the room? There's the $100 hamburger, well known in the private pilot world, where you just want to fly for a couple hours. You go someplace nice, little tiny airport in the middle of nowhere. It's got a nice little diner. You go for a cheeseburger and come back, and it's you basically burned $100, but you've had fun. You're flying. To me, Rock Hall is like the $100 ice cream cone or the $100 crab sandwich. But anyway, so I'm talking real voyage planning, like at least we're going to Cape May. That's what a lot of these slides are based on. You're going to Philly, you're going to Norfolk, or you're going to Key West or whatever. That is you start with the end in mind, because we know here in our own backyard where the weird stuff is. We know where those 2-pound net structures are out there, so we won't hit those. So I always go back to front. You can certainly drive here to there, but the more research is needed as you approach the destination. Figure it out. I believe in a notebook. Certainly there's lots of digital tools, but you're not going to remember it all. And you can take the notes if you've got a paper chart book. They don't. Like last year at this time, I told everybody, hey, if you want to have a beautiful map or chart of the Chesapeake Bay to frame and put on your wall, hurry up. September 23, they stopped printing them, so you might still be able to find them in a few stores that do print on demand, but if you want to capture this piece of beautiful artwork, you better hurry. But they will still be available in paper form from MapTech. They make the US versions, or if you're going to Canada, the Richardson's company does the Canada sections. But these are kind of cut up pieces of the chart book. You can see I've got some annotations there and some highlighter to avoid some dangerous areas, whatever. But do your planning. I'm a huge fan of the chart book. Each of these are $27 when you could buy them. The entire book is just over 100, and you get what effectively is probably 200 charts all woven into one. Unlike your chart plotter, unless you go home and put your chart plotter on the wall on something this big, you really can't see the big picture. On the paper charts, you really can. They're great at voyage planning. They're great talking about that. So now I believe in plotting the route, yes, on a second source. So for me, that's in Navionics in the app, and then on the boat's chart plotter. I've always got a backup. They both have GPS receivers. I love double redundancy. Depending on where I'm going, I also plot it on paper because I'm a geek and a little too wedded to paper charts probably. But then once you've plotted it, then fly the track. Now, avoid auto routing might be a little strong, but because auto routing has its benefits, and literally you can click just outside Herring Bay once and then click St. Michael's and wait 30 seconds, and Navionics or Garmin or Raymarine, one of their apps, will go and show you the route. In this morning's session, I showed in great detail how one that I really built using that function put us on the wrong lane of traffic, took us way too close to some shallow soundings. So it's a decent thing when Ashley says, hey, let's go to Philly next week. Okay, how far is that? How long is it going to take me? Auto route, boom. Gives me total time and distance, and you can tell Navionics how fast you're going to go. It's very helpful. But if you've got auto routing either on your boat's chart plotter or you're using an app, you then have to zoom way in. Not only is that going to show up some obstructions that you hadn't noticed at the bigger zoom when it auto routed, but then move the waypoints because it will regularly send you into oncoming traffic because it likes to route you in the shortest point between two lines, and in any scenario in which there's a left curving trend of the shoreline, like if you auto route from here to Annapolis, this gentle curve will put you right up against the shallow water and on the nose of every single mariner who's doing the right thing per the rules of the road and staying to the right. Your auto route has just plotted you basically up the oncoming lane of traffic in every left tending river, left tending channel, et cetera. So be wary. So after you do an auto route, then you go back and you adjust and move around all the obstructions. It'll meander you through a shipping channel, drag them all just outside the channel so you don't hit the ships. Speaking of channel, I digress because Ash and I were talking about this morning. We were recently, we went to Baltimore and we were with friends and we talked about it afterwards, and our friend said, it's like, hey, you know, we were in the channel and this ship was coming down and man, we have every right to be in the channel. I'm like, no, you don't. And here's why. Rule 13 in the rules of the road, all about, you know, it's got other rules that talk about crossing and meeting situation and overtaking and the relative privilege of vessel. All of those maneuvering and privilege related rules start with notwithstanding rules 9, 10, and 13. 13, and I'm trying to make sure I get my number right, is the one that says a vessel that is required to navigate in a channel because of its draft shall not be impeded by another vessel. Therefore, all of us have no right to the channel between here and Baltimore. Now, certainly it's a handy navigational tool. You've got big, gigantic red and green monsters that you get to drive down the middle of, and you've got 2 big white range lights on every single leg that line you up. It's fun. If there's a ship coming your way, or keep looking behind you, coming up your way, get out of the channel. It's just as handy to go outside the red buoys, the big monster trees. Now you've just got buoys going down one side of the boat. Easy navigation all the way up there. You have no right to the channel because it wasn't dredged to 52 feet for you. It was for them. And the rule says you cannot impede them. So don't plot buoy collision tracks. And that is kind of a paper reference thing. And I'll whip out any one of these map tech charts and try and find, there we go. So I know this might be a little eye chart, but you might be able to see these magenta lines drawn, and they've got magnetic courses to and from. You may be able to see that they are literally drawn from a buoy, that one's a position near a buoy, to a buoy, to a buoy, and they've got the latitude, longitude in a little box. It's a handy plotting tool. Do not transfer those latitude, longitudes. You can plot manually by dragging and dropping tracks, or you can actually plug in lat long. Please do not plot a buoy collision track. Strangely, that's how they do it, because when you're going north or south, you're supposed to choose which side of the buoy you're going to be on, so they printed the book straight to the buoy. Please don't do that. Under the rules of the road and all your plotting, stay to the right. Now, if you want to do a track down basically the center, just know that because all of our chart plotters have a way to, once you've built a route and you save it and give it an intuitive name, to St. Michael's, to Cape May or whatever, save it. There's a button on all of our plotters that say load and reverse, so you can come home. Well, if you've built your plot to stay on the right side of the track, then you need to build a whole new one and save it coming home. then it's okay to build it down the center. Just know you should never fly your track. And that's another thing that in many, many documented collisions, and especially on the Intercoastal Waterway, we'll get to the magenta line in a little bit, people who plot a track in their chart plotter, and it's beautiful and it's colorful and the line is there and it's got on ship and all these other tracks. I am staying on my track, by God, because my wife and I laid out this trip and we are going to Key West, and that's my line on the chart plotter. Can't you all see? Well, no, they can't see. You don't have the right to your track. Your track is an approximate plan from which you deviate as soon as you leave the slip. So it's a guide. You have no right to the line, and similarly on the magenta line, we'll get to that. We already talked about auto turn, buoy collision, plot bailouts, we'll get to that a little bit, and then watch out for commercial traffic patterns, the approaches to New York City, approaches to Baltimore and all that, just the tracks and the traffic separation schemes are plotted clearly. Yes, sir?
So I'm going into both one day, a couple years back, and that has a commercial traffic pattern in Morehead City.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And on my chart plotter, it didn't show, there's a no wake zone,
Mm-hmm.
as I'm sure many commercial,
Right.
my NOAA charts didn't show it. So I'm cruising along. As it turned out, it was a Sunday and there was a Trump parade coming down the channel. So I'm going through all these guys at 14, 15 knots, and they're all flipping me off. Finally, the Coast Guard pulls me over and says, "Don't you know there's a no wake zone?" I said, "I don't see it on my chart." I said, "Didn't you see the marker?" The marker's not on the chart.
Yeah. Yeah, many of those, I didn't go over that this morning. Any of the vertical white buoys with an orange ring around them are advisory in nature, but typically have local or state laws behind them. And the symbology, I don't have a chart, but the symbology on there is square, diamond, and I think there may be some triangles. The key is and there's circles. And so, yeah, circle, square, and diamond. The pointier the thing is, the more it can hurt you.
Why is that not on the charts? I mean, I went down the ICW years back, none of the official,
Right.
whether it's Coast Guard or
Yeah, there's no Coast Guard. The wake thing, and in fact, I was going to do a slide, and it's the whatever you do after this course and any other study, don't be a knucklehead. My wife said you cannot use douchebag, so don't be a knucklehead when you're in your boat. Now, the no wake concept is not a federal regulated concept. There are no federal no wake zones, which is why they're not on the ENCs, they're not on the paper charts, et cetera. They are local, but they're no kidding, in most cases, there are laws on the books, and when you're in their local jurisdiction, you are subject to local waters and all that stuff. That said, there is well-established case law behind you're responsible for your wake and the damage that you cause. And so,
unlike notices to airmen for pilots.
right.
There are notices to mariners.
Oh, sure. No, but I mean, notices to mariners, there's the broadcast notice to mariners, and then there's the NOTAMs you can get online, all predate, and nice thing is about ENCs, the electronic navigational charts, real notice to mariners are converted to those ENC updates literally every day.
But they won't talk to them.
No, that is not, because that's,
It's a state,
right.
a local.
Like in the upper Magathie River, before we get to our house, I'm very happy, there's a line of white buoys, and I think they're squares. So they've got some points on them, therefore the points can hurt you. Or actually, they may be diamonds. No, diamonds like isolated rock. They are squares. There's some sort of statutory teeth behind those points. It's probably Maryland law, and it's enforceable by Department of Natural Resources, police, or whatever. I live on the slow side of the buoys, so I'm happy my boat's protected because mine's too heavy to be on a lift, et cetera. But yeah, they're not going to be on the chart, but keeping an eye out for those white buoys and breaking out the binoculars and oh no, that's crab line. Okay, I'm good, I'm not a crabber. Oh, that one's no wake zone, that's isolated danger, or that's a fishing area or something like that, or swimming area. That's what you see on those the white buoys, but that's it. That's a state or local ordinance. We'll talk a little later about fuel management, tide currents, weathers, and all that. and I'm quickly running out of time. I did this last time. All right, starting with the end in mind, this is a zoom on the paper chart view out of the book here. Lots of data in here, lots of information, but I'm immediately, because this is, I'm planning a trip to Cape May. That's our theoretical. I'm planning a trip to Cape May, and so on the paper chart where I begin my voyage planning, I'm already seeing stuff that I need to look into and do some research. Where do I go? Sometimes it's a note on the chart. At the break, we talked about the notes that are on the chart. On a digital chart, you zoom in and query an object, query a warning, and it will give you the table. But frequently it'll say, referred to Code of Federal Regulations 307.so-and-so, also found in the Coast Pilot. And so I didn't bring my physical copy of Coast Pilot 3 here. I normally would have it up here, but I forgot to bring it. But there's a picture of the Coast Pilot. It's also available and updated constantly in near real time on that website, part of NOAA's website. The Coast Pilot is basically the official government guidebook for any area. Now, our region, Region 3, covers Sandy Hook, New Jersey, all the way down to Cape Henry, including the entire Chesapeake. If you're going further south, you need Region 4, Cape Henry to Key West. If you're going further north, it's Sandy Hook, New Jersey to Cape Cod. That's Region 2. You'll be well served in this area if you have Coast Pilot number 3 on board. I encourage you to buy a new one because it's very handy to whip that out, especially if you're doing paper chart planning at home and you have the Coast Pilot right there, you can look it up. So here's all the extra information that I found in the Coast Pilot. Had I looked closely on the chart, I would have noticed, but I didn't initially. I read in the Coast Pilot reminder that the whole leave red buoys on the right when returning from sea, red right returning, it switches because in the middle of the Cape May Channel, seaward changes. The Atlantic is at the top of the slide here. Delaware Bay is at the bottom of the slide. When you're going into the Cape May Canal from Delaware Bay, red's on your right, and then the buoy colors switch. And so I noted there, the Coast Pilot was like, hey, watch out. Don't forget, right about at the middle, the buoy colors switch. And so all these other specifics are what I found. The one that zoomed in, that Cape May Railroad Bridge, it gave a crazy low height there of, like 8 feet. Well, that's when it's closed. And then the specifics they gave me, it included the schedule of the ferry, blah, blah. So I learned more about Cape May before I began that. And then which marina, how do I check the draft? Coast Pilot is pretty much silent on private stuff, but I'm a big fan of the Waterway Guide. So there's a paper version, of course, but then, they break them into regions. This is the Chesapeake Bay one from the Waterway Guide, but they've got a great website, and you get the full service for some very modest annual fee, and it lets you zoom in and toggle. You can see in the pull-down menu there's marinas. That's what I've got displayed now. You can also, in the pull-down menu, select anchorages and a whole different thing, or bridges and a whole different thing, locks, fuel locations, all that. And so, a lot of this is crowdsourced, but Waterway Guide does a very nice job, filtering out, and it's high quality. It is the best source for fuel prices, constantly updated inside the Waterway Guide online. So actual plotting, we're kind of going backwards from at the absolute bottom right of the screen there is the departure from Cape May. Again, we're going backwards, dropping and using for easy screenshots. I use Garmin's Navionics, but the same steps are present in your chart plotter under navigation, planning, or planning routes, edit route or manual start a route and build one. You get to do that, and you literally start it, drag, click on the line, and then you've got to zoom in to make sure you click on the right spot. Please note that I did this track straight up the shipping channel, right in the center. I know that if the ship comes, I'm going to get out of the channel. I need to stay to the right for passing. I have no right to the commercial channel, that kind of thing. And I've used Navionics for years. I'm not endorsing it. I like it. It's intuitive. I also like Aqua Maps, and I've got Raymarine on the boat, so it doesn't matter. I do a backup source, so this is my paper plot on the paper chart. Flip to that page, and you'll see, I've highlighted it with red so you can see it, but you can see my pencil line written in there, and I've written avoid crab pots in pencil, and basically that's the route for avoiding crab pots if I'm going through at a crab season time of year. Very valid route, goes way straight up at 320 magnetic course, but it's right in the middle of where the Coast Pilot said, hey, watch out for the crab charts. Note the pre-printed route on the chart. I'm pointing to that collision with the buoy to buoy routing, because off the screen, it runs me right into a buoy. So I plotted just slightly to the left because I don't like that. And again, I'm not trying to sell everybody on paper charts as a voice planning tool. You can certainly do it and kind of scroll back and forth on your router, but I'm a big fan. And as affordable as they are, you take a lightning hit, battery loss or whatever. But the nice thing is, especially if you're on a long trip, you tuck that under your arm and go out to dinner, and you and your crew can kind of plan the next day and flip the charts on paper. It's just a great thing to have. So here's a little zoom of just kind of the difference of paper charts and the information they provide on the screen. On the right is the paper chart, and on the left is ENC view with electronic nav notation and international symbology. On the right side, it tells me an awful lot. On the left, I've got a click, and you can see when I clicked on it and queried it, that little menu popped up, and I've got to find, I've got to find the light, then I click on it and learn about that. Paper charts, it's all on the page. You've got to query the layers, which is why, depending on your software and which brand you have, some you can just hover your mouse or trackball there. Others, you've actually got to click and query. But this tells me at the upper right, Miamal Shoal light. It's giving me the light characteristics. It's occulting, which is basically, instead of blinking a long time, an occulting light is the period of light is distinctly longer than the dart. In other words, occulting lights wink at you. They're just like on, briefly dark, on. And so this one is occulting every 4 seconds. So it's white, briefly dark, white for 4 seconds, briefly dark. It also tells me that it's 59 feet tall. The light itself is visible for 10 miles, and it has a horn on it when its little sensor that's on the light tower detects fog. The horn comes on, and then it also says RAYCON right below, which is an acronym within an acronym, radar, I think it's, what is that? Radar beacon, yeah, RAYCON. A great kind of an old aging tool. That picture there is the actual Miamal Shoal light, but what you see on radar, if you've got your radar on, is those two big gigantic rays. They look like exclamation points. This is me and own ship steaming, this is head up, not north up, steaming right by, in the channel, steaming right by the light, or approaching the light. It's on the starboard bow now. And on the radar are these two big gigantic things. If you haven't seen RAYCON, or if you haven't queried it on your electronic navigational chart to find that it has a radar transponder beacon, then you might be alarmed to see what looks like, two gigantic long barges or two aircraft carriers, one towing the other one. And as you steam by, those aircraft carriers are pivoting because they're pointing straight at you the whole time. It might be alarming, so do the research, start with the end in mind, and check out the RAYCON. It's pretty cool. Of note, dash, 2 dashes is, I'm not expecting everybody to know Morse code, but it's kind of cool. 2 dashes is M for Miamal Shoal. They're all RAYCONs transmit something that's intuitive. So here's the little zigzags of the deep stuff inside. Again, a Navionics Garmin thing. This is if instead of going to Cape May, you wanted to go to Wildwood, and maybe you have teenagers who wanted to go see the monster truck thing on the beach or whatever. If that's what you like, that's the route if you want to plan all that and go there. I would not go much farther because the Jersey Intercoastal is pretty scary. This plots it. I'm zooming out now. Plot all the way up, stayed with the channel. Cape May at the bottom right, coming up, and note the numbers are growing here because I'm building it in that direction, but I can go in my system and do load and reverse. When you get to the top, you're in Upper Delaware Bay and the Chesapeake Delaware Canal. There's no speed restriction in here, but you are not allowed to sail under sail through here. That's the only real restriction. It's super wide, well lighted at night. If you go through at night, wide enough to have 2 ships easily passing and plenty of room still for you. So no issue that you're going to have a lot of traffic there. And then right in the center, and I've just done a zoom, that zoom and expansion is not a feature of Navionics, a picture within a picture, but I've just created that and zoomed it in just to show you that that's right there at Chesapeake City. There's a big bridge. On the top side, on the north side, is a marina. On the bottom is a free basin where you can anchor, and there's also a free city dock if there's room. No power, but you can go stay there at night for free. Then coming down the bay, of note, you can see on the paper chart, you can see on the ENC, there's this restricted area warning. Now, I had no plans to get anywhere near there. We have gone all the way to Havre de Grace, and that does take us, and in fact, auto routing will take you mighty close to this big fat red dotted line. If you click on the notes, query it in the ENC, or look at it on in the Coast Pilot, you'll find that that's the restricted area involving live fire for Aberdeen Proving Ground. Tells you to stay outside the yellow buoys and you're fine, and watch for safety boats. In fact, the last time when we went to Havre de Grace, there were a couple of Navy combatant craft boats out there doing live fire, 50 cal shooting or whatever, shooting away from us, and with a safety boat out there watching. The idea of just bailout anchorages, you should always kind of think about and examine options along the way. Plenty of choices here, lots of bailouts along the way as we were coming down, as you're coming back into the home area. Now we start to recognize our home anchorage, and again, if this was a new area for us, I'd want to know where are my bailouts if I get delayed or if weather changes. If I wanted ice cream, here's Rock Hall, and then you can cruise on down, and then we're getting into our home territory and back home. And again, I did not plot it straight into Harrington South. I don't need a waypoint reached alarm beeping at me as I'm making a turn inside the basin. And so you stop it there, and then note the little Garmin symbol that shows a finish line flag at the end. And that same route saved as Cape May, you click it and hit reverse and load, and that becomes the starting point. And that first waypoint will be number 1. Now,
Tate,
yes, please.
During this trip, what are you using for weather forecasting for the next days?
Man, you are a great safe man. We're going to get to Windy in a second, which is my favorite app. There's a bunch of weather apps, but I love Windy. Now, of note, I draw your attention to, and this is common in Active Captain. This is present on Navionics, other places where you can display a layer of crowdsourced information. We went into that in depth this morning and made fun of a lot of the crowdsourcing stuff. Here's another great example of, right here is buoy 83 Alpha, and you've got to zoom in 1 layer clicker to see the name 83A. And there's this cluster of little dots. When you zoom in more, they become little green pluses. Every one of these is some helpful mariner has decided to give us a little cookie crumb trail. That one says shallows to the west. Of course it does, yes, because that's not a pinnacle. Anyway, this one says great anchorage. I'm like, okay. These are attempts at helpful mariners, clearly with questionable GPS accuracy, plotting the southern and the northern pound net. And these are the big structures that you've seen out here. Here's one. Actually, I still don't see the zoom click any greater zoom. We talked about this in the last lesson that the only thing on the chart, actually I think the words are just off here. It says fish trap area. That's all it says. And if you go to the Maryland Department of Natural Resources website, where all of the permits for them are all filed, they're all over the entire bay, but their positions are approximate, and it doesn't tell you which ones are active or not. This is the pound net. This is the bigger one of the two that's very close to buoy 83 Alpha and just outside in Herring Bay. If you're not familiar with these are, the big pilings, and look how deep they are. I mean, this is in 26, 23s. These are like, 40-foot poles driven into the ground, sort of marked with indicators. Thank you. They're required by law to light them, and so that the seagull is sitting on is one of those yellow blinking lights like you see on a construction on the side of the road, and it has a battery and the batteries die. And these structures are kind of shaped like an arrow. The long axis directs fish into the big catch net that's at the very end. They pick them up every day or two with a crane and sell them by the pound, hence the term pound net, the real fishing term. It's a weir. And they're not on the chart, and this display is my own ancient, note the grainy screen, mid-2000s era Raymarine display. We drove our boat right up next to these when Ashley took that awesome photo, and a bunch of others of it, and because it's in such deep water, and I literally went around it, or actually I was right next to it and just plotted a tiny 3-point route and did a 1-point route. I labeled it pound net. I went into the menu. You can, your waypoints don't have to be an X or a square. You have several things to choose from on many of your things. I gave it the skull and crossbones as a reminder. I labeled it pound net, and I turned the route display on, and I leave it on all the time. Every time we're in that area, I don't have to turn them on. They're always there to remind me that these unmarked, uncharted things are there. Of note, round objects are really, really good at reflecting radar information, and so if you cruise in the daytime with your radar on, you will see this huge radar return around them. Now, on the same trip, we've got to do fuel management, and so depending on what you've got on your boat, you may have some great real-time fuel flow rate indicators. That Caterpillar glass cockpit at the bottom gives super precise information. That flow scan system, which like clamps onto the fuel line and it inductively takes it, or the one on the upper left is for my own Cummins QSM11, and it gives fuel flow rate. I've built a little paper table of what my fuel consumption is at various speeds. These little entry windows are in the Navionics app, and so I'm telling it what my own vessel settings are. And as you can see, here's the perfect example of the speed penalty of the oxymoron that I own a fast trawler. If I go trawler speeds, I'm sipping fuel at 3.8 an hour. If I double my speed, it's almost quintuple consumption. So these days we go slow a lot. But if you don't have an onboard ability and you don't have any advanced way to truly identify fuel burn rate, then you can Google the fuel burn rate of your engine. Engines turn propellers, and there's only modest difference between the engine that's sized in your vessel and your own wetted surface and all that. So you can get a decent estimate of what your burn rate's gonna be, and so that'll help you plot your stuff. Do you have enough time? You can query, again, Garmin tools, but lots of other apps out there that give you the sunrise and sunset at a place. And so here we're going to Cape May, so I query, just click on that little rising, falling tide gauge right there, click on the time, but that's the time of sunset. The diagram to the bottom right shows you that you've got 30 more minutes for what's declared civil twilight, which is really bright, and even another 30 minutes nautical twilight. So I don't advise planning your trip to get somewhere after dark, but know that if you did, don't stress out. You'll still have decent enough light to see the dock and do line handling and all that stuff if you're 30 minutes after, even an hour after. We talked about weather. These are screenshots from the Windy app, and this may in fact determine your rate of speed, depending on how my wife and I still work and we still have schedules that we have to meet. They always say the most dangerous thing on a boat is a schedule, so be careful. But if I check different days on Sunday the 26th, this is the notoriously choppy, steep, boxy wave. This entire view here is the Delaware Bay. So the difference between Sunday versus Monday. This is coming back on that trip, for example, when I did this screenshot. So if I am traveling in that area Sunday, I've only got 1 foot waves, and I've displayed wave height. If I wait until, if I go slow and I arrive on Monday, then I'm getting hammered. And 3 feet in the Chesapeake with the wind opposing the tide is just as bad as the Delaware Bay. You get pounded with this short period. Look at 3 seconds. Oh my God, that's like a drum just beating on your head. So that might determine whether or not, hey, I'm willing to burn 20 gallons an hour to get there and get through that quiet period. Similarly, you look at the winds. So now Sunday, not only is it lower wave heights, we've got lower winds. If I wait till Monday, I've got a 3-knot sea and a kicking 18-knot east wind. No way, I'm going fast. I'm taking the fuel penalty or just rescheduling the trip. You can do those tide sources on your, and especially if you've got a really modern system, you can probably query the tide tables. You can do them on many apps. If you really want to get kind of old school, it's still web-based, you can go to NOAA's Tide app, click on the state, zoom in, and you click on these little lollipops, and the green is currents, the red and yellow is tide height, and then you can display what the tide is going to be. And so I'm making choices here. Depart in the morning from Harrington Harbor. If I pause for lunch in the C&D Canal, now I'm looking at slack water when I get to the approaches to Cape May, as opposed to if I didn't wait for lunch, then I'd be have a major current in my face. So something to check on planning. The nice thing is many of the apps or your own chart plotter, you can slide the time slider and you can see the current arrows change direction, and some software will grow and make little arrows and big arrows to show you tidal current strength, which is helpful. Reminder that slack tide does not mean slack current, and so use the current vector when you're querying that. Frequently, you'll reach low tide, and then the entire mass of some nearby bay still hasn't flown past you. And in fact, in our last lecture last year, somebody said, it's like, yeah, I timed so-and-so to leave right at slack tide, and I had 3 knots at the dock at whatever location they're at. It's like, yeah, there's a big difference between current flow and timing and tide. Now we're heading out. Yes, we're day of departure. Let's check the weather. Let's brief the plan. Back to I have no rights to my own track by God. Follow the plan, but deviate when required, but in crew resource management terms, and communicate the change. It's like, hey, I'm turning early on this waypoint to avoid those 4 vessels that are coming. That's why I'm doing that. You have no right to the track. And then we'll get to the magenta line on the next slide, danger regarding the intercoastal waterway, and lots of magenta line reported collisions and groundings every year. We talked about be ready to anchor, use your tools, and then if you've got either Navionics app or some recent data, there is the Army Corps of Engineers overlay. This little zoom view of, it's a screenshot just off of my phone, of the Aquamaps app, which lets you turn on recent Corps of Engineers survey data, and caution, only use recent data, because if you use that function, it gives you a heat map of recent depth. The choices are all 3 years, 1.5 years, or months. 3 years is a little too long, way too much sand movement and storms here. At 1.5 is when that turns on, so that's very recent data, and it explains why the one and only time that I tried to go through there, I ran aground. Because it's really, we went over that this morning, but basically, until they dredge it, you've got some 3-footers in the middle of the channel. And I draw 411, and that explains why I ran aground. That's the Naps Narrows going through Tillman Island. And so if you draw even close to 3 feet or more, you can't. I mean, I can zoom in after we're done, because we were over time already. But I can zoom in and show anybody that. All right, so here's the magenta line in 3 different views. On the paper chart, you can see the faint little magenta line going up. In the upper section on Aquamaps, it's black for some reason, and it basically starts in the middle of the screen and goes up. And then Navionics, it's magenta, but it's dotted. And They are notoriously bad, and it's not a track, it's just kind of a heads up. For example, if you were, whether it's on your paper chart or on a digital chart, and you're approaching this junction, oh, hey, I see there's some green and red buoys over here. I just want to double check. This can't, the magenta line cannot be your primary, hey, here's how I'm getting from Norfolk to Key West. The magenta line is just a reminder that when you come to some junction, oh, if my intention is to continue on the intracoastal, then stay on the magenta line. Just go left. In so many cases, I mean, this is almost on top of the red marker, takes you right over an obstruction, and there are other examples which I didn't display because I want to do something associated with that Cape May trip, and this is just up to, that's Wildwood up here, there are plenty of examples where the magenta line is improperly drawn and improperly printed, and it literally goes on the other side of a marker. And there have been, in fact, there was a big lawsuit about the magenta line, and the big collision happened in Port St. Lucie Canal, which is the canal leading to and from the Okeechobee. An inexperienced mariner blindly and religiously followed the magenta line outside. The line was drawn outside of a red or green day marker, went aground. His wife crashed into the wall and broke her neck and broke her skull, and a huge big lawsuit. And I think Garmin settled for a bunch of money, or maybe it was the chart paper, because the implied trust of the company was there. So here's the zoom view of Tillman Island. And this is clicking the 1.5 year or less. So this is a pretty recent survey. It's got an unusual marker that is a leftover from back when some green markers were black. There actually is a big black vertical pole there that in theory marked the edge of the track. If you didn't have the Corps of Engineers stuff turned on, then it looks like, oh yeah, I'm good. And if I click in the center, I've got 6 feet all the way. Well, no, you don't. Based on survey data, it goes really bad from this marker on, and then zooming in, and that 3, maybe here is where Tate ran aground. I remember looking out the port quarter and seeing this little pole. Well, hey, I was between the green and the red, and I was preparing to make this slight little jink to starboard. This tells me the only reasonably safe route, and again, this is already a 1.5 year old data, so the sands have moved some, so I don't trust it, but it was bad then. If you stayed exactly on the red buoy line, then I might have been okay. But no, I'm conditioned to go down the middle of the channel, so.
You're kind of favoring the southern side of the
Well, the 1.5 year old survey data, and survey data is incredibly accurate. They're going back and forth with extremely accurate sonar, way better than any fathometer that any of us have on their boat. So this is absolutely reliable data the day they finish the survey. And every storm that's happened.
I personally have found every year it changes.
Oh yeah, no, it's every time a storm, I mean, half the bay is washing through there, and the Chop Tank and Tread Ave are pouring back through when the tide turns. So of course it's shallow, but this tells me, not only explains why I ran aground. In the Navy, we get fired when we run ships aground. So we frown upon that. If you haven't been boating in the Chesapeake long enough, or you haven't been boating in Chesapeake long enough, if you haven't touched bottom, I realize that, but it was still a wound to my heart for sure. But that explains why, and I will never have to go, despite the great little restaurant there. Sir?
Navionics doesn't have that capability, right?
I don't think so. Now, Navionics, or Garmin bought Navionics, Aquamap has it, the advanced Raymarine Lighthouse Charts has it, but it's an available layer that you can select, and again, if you got a very new chart plotter, you can probably find it in your menu and display it, but check the age and select 1.5 years or less, or even months to make sure you can trust it. Required reading, and I've got them listed here, both on the screen and on the table here, kind of in order of preference, and I'm not Chesapeake Maritime thing, Waterway Guide's great, but it's not an educational tool as much as I encourage everybody, no kidding, need to know the rules of the road more than I could teach an entire class on the Zen level stuff, but we covered the really critical ones already. How to read a nautical chart. Chart number 1 is the US government publication that describes what every one of these symbols means, as well as the new symbols that you see in international notation on your digital electronic charts. But Nigel Calder, a very prolific and brilliant marine writer, has written kind of all the symbology explained, and it's an easy read. It's not academic and excruciating like just thumbing through chart 1 is. It's a great, great book. The next one, Boat Navigation for the Rest of Us, written, targeted at the recreational boater market, but it's so good that I've used it and given it to junior officers on every single ship I've ever served on. I trust this book. It's just so intuitive. Next is Chapman's. That's everything all in one. And then if you want to dive deeply into really making your radar effective, I highly recommend David Birch's book. All the stuff. He owns StarPath navigation courses. You can take online courses. He's written a bunch of books, and StarPath is excellent. Way off the edge is Bowditch, the monster, the Bible, the tome. But because it's, you know, it's like studying Torah. I mean, it is just so academic and scholastic, and you know, it teaches you the why behind everything. You may not need it. Of course, I've got a copy at home. But all right, that is all I've got. Thank you very much for your time, and I apologize. I went over. Thank you.